Awesome. Well, Soma, it is so good to be with you guys. It is so exciting to see all of you. Thanks for joining us online. I always forget to. Thanks for joining us online. There we go. I always forget to mute the stream I have open as well. But Soma, it's great to be with you guys. I'm at the end of this. I'm going to post all of the Zoom IDs and Zoom links so that you guys can jump in life groups after. We have 4 life groups happening. There's going to be a grade 6, 7, 8 girls, grade 6, 7, 8 boys, and then grade 9 to 12 boys and 9 to 12 girls. And so you guys can jump in Zoom afterwards. But I'm really excited. Tonight we have a special guest. We've been going through all of my pastors, former pastors, current pastors. And so I'm really excited to introduce my pastor. We worked together at Village, and now he is at Westside. And so Soma, meet Pastor Cliff Ursel. Now, Pastor Cliff, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? All of that.
Oh man, okay. How long? I'm old, so I got a lot of history here. How long do you want me to talk for on this? 1 minute or like 30 minutes?
Just keep going, and then I'll jump in there.
All right, all right. Hey, so for me, I started actually as a student in high school. My move into ministry started, I think, when I was 13 years old, and I initiated a club at my high school. This was like back when your parents were like my age, like this was been like 83. And from there, I just started slowly more and more getting involved in the high schools and working with students. I did that for about 15, 20 years. And then hit some really tough patches, which we'll probably talk about in a bit. And then when everything was kind of like at its lowest point, I was out of work. My family was really broken. I had no idea what was going to happen. God in his grace took us from nobodies with nowhere to go and started working at one of the biggest churches in the country, which is Willingdon Church. And my wife started leading in worship there. I was working in young adults with men, women ministry. I kind of did a lot of it all. Worked at Willingdon Church for about 7 years. I just started my 7th year, and then I transitioned to Village Church in Surrey. Did that for a while, which is, Jordan, where I kind of met you. Actually, I'm having a flashback on a call just like this.
Yes.
Right, you remember that?
I was still in California. And
yeah. And you were talking about working with kids.
yes, I was. I think I was applying for a kids position because I knew I was coming back to Canada, and so we jumped on a group Zoom call or Skype call at the time, and then Cliff gave me the gear. He gave me I don't think this guy's a good fit. I don't like him. I don't trust him. Californians are weird. Don't hire him.
Yeah, guys, I wish that wasn't true, but I was like, yeah, no, this doesn't feel right. And that's exactly, Jordan, that's exactly what happened. And we did one of those after that one Zoom call. And then God in his grace, again, I'm plugging away at Village, and you come rolling in on a very different role, which I think, again, that was God's goodness, because it got you on a track, which actually got you ending up where you're at now. So that was cool. And then for me, I was just doing my thing in Village. And then about 4 years ago, we started one of Village's second largest site, Langley South location, which was a total crazy time. And in that, again, we'll talk about this later. I hit some really bad walls, roadblocks. I fell into a pit of depression for about 3 years. Again, God is super gracious, and we got out of that. I was super healthy. And then about 4 months ago, I transitioned into Westside. And so now I live downtown. I'm a baller. I got a place in White Rock with my kids, and me and my wife live downtown, 1 block from BC Place. Yeah, we're working here. I got here, and like 2 weeks later, there's a freaking global pandemic. And so I'm here.
I mean, who says ministry doesn't pay good? Living downtown Vancouver, making the big bucks, working at Westside Church. Are
So
you
now here's the
guys?
funny thing, though. We talk about God. I do believe that God does provide, but it's always different. I rented out my basement suite in my house, and I parked my Jeep Wrangler. We're only a one-car family, and just those two things is what pays for my condo. I'm actually not paying any money for my condo.
I mean, I love that being smart. Now let's kind of get into the meat of this. And so you kind of talked briefly about stints of depression, seasons of disappointments. Why don't you take us through probably that 12, 13 year period, and you can go into really whatever you want about just deep disappointments, because I'm sure in this season a lot of people are feeling some big disappointments, whether
Mm,
it's prom, graduation,
yeah.
trips. There's so many things that could just be happening, whether it's layoffs, all of these things. There's going to be some really deep disappointments. Some of the things that you went through are probably a little bit, I don't want to say bigger, but could play into the narrative of what they're feeling, because the situation might be different, but the feelings are probably very similar. So why don't you talk us through some of the disappointments?
Yeah. Before I do, I want to say this. When all my disappointments happened, and there were a lot. Oh man, there are a lot. I didn't handle them well. I just kind of packed them away and ignored them. And the first time it started, I was actually 12 years old. I was in grade 8. I was really young. Like I graduated at 17 years old. I was really young, just because my birthday's late in the year. It's not that I was a gifted student. Um, I was bullied really bad for like a year and a half, and I couldn't figure out why people, like my friends, seemed to just really enjoy the fact that this guy just wanted to beat the crap out of me, and I basically ran and avoided him, and subsequently pretty much everybody else for about a year and a half. So that was my first really big disappointment, in that I didn't. The biggest one wasn't that I got bullied by that guy. It was that the people that I thought were my friends just turned their back on me. It happened again at 17 years old when I went to change churches. I wanted to move into a ministry position, and I went to church for all the wrong reasons. I went just for friends. I went just to hang out for the good time. Not that that's bad, but that was all I did. And so I wanted to position myself, again, to kind of go down this road of working in a church and serve God with my whole life. All my friends cut me out. Like, I mean, all. I went from, being, having a really active social life to nothing. And then what you're referring to, Jordan, there was probably about a 12-year period where every year something really, really bad happened. I'll give you some random ones. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with a liver disease that would kill her. And then year after year, there was all these problems where she'd always get rushed to the hospital. Our favorite aunt was diagnosed with cancer and just died a slow, terrible death.
Now, how old
Um,
were you at this time? Like
so
what,
no,
what's
thanks. Yeah.
what
So
stage of life?
the ones I'm telling you now in the rapid succession, I'm older. I'm going to be this stuff would have started probably in my 30s. So like when Aaron's mom got sick and all that, that was late 20s, early 30s. I was part of a church, which was my family, brother-in-law and sister, where there was a lot of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, manipulation, and all of that. And so that was just constantly coming down on us. I had to leave that. And that's where I referred to earlier. My family's really broken. My wife's in counseling. I have no job. I got nothing. No one wants to touch me with a 10-foot pole. I'm damaged goods and had to literally restart my life out of nothing. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, which was ridiculous. It's brutal. And then he died. And the night that he died, I had to tell the doctors, like, just stop working on him, let Jesus take him. This would have been about 8 years ago. And then, like, talking to my mom, I pulled her out of the hospital room and I said, Mom, I don't know how you're going to remember tonight, but I need you to know I'm the one that made the decision to let Jesus take Dad. And like just really, really hard stuff. Another favorite aunt, my sister-in-law died of cancer. I don't know. It's just like I literally they're all a blur. All of this stuff. My very good friend got was charged with sexual assault and was put in prison. My mentor turned his back on me as a result of all of that stuff because I wouldn't do some things that weren't super ethical. Like I could go on, but that's kind of all of this mounting stuff.
Right. So, you're in a further along stage of life. You have young
Yeah,
kids, young family, where things are, if you're on like the hamster wheel of life, so to speak, you're supposed to be going up and to the right. And every time you feel like you take a step forward, you just get smoked with a baseball bat, flat on your back, um,
yeah.
just beat up. And it's not just once. It's like,
No, no, time
it's
after time.
over
Yeah.
and over and over. Did you ever start asking the question like, why is this happening to me?
Um,
Like, did you ever start feeling bad for yourself, throwing
oh
yourself
yeah,
pity
yeah.
parties?
I felt bad for myself. I didn't really ask why did this happen to me. But yeah, like my New Year's resolution used to be like literally, this is no joke. Dear God, I'd pray that this year won't be as bad as last year. Like every New Year's, that's what I would do. And I would literally like, oh, we're March, we're doing pretty good. And then eventually I just stopped and I just my New Year's resolution or prayer was, God, just let me be able to handle whatever crap is going to come my way. And so I did. I struggled with that for sure. And yeah, like I don't really know what else to say. Like my theology was pretty good. Like what I mean by that, guys, is like what I knew about God and what I knew about myself and whatnot. I was pretty grounded in that, and so um, like I couldn't explain why I was going through what I was going, but I knew that God was in it, that there was something about it, and in that I just had to trust Him. With the things that I didn't know and the things, and that's when it gets hard, right? Like it wasn't blind hope. I'm just like, God, I just have to trust you. And so that's where I went. I couldn't, I struggled with like a little bit of resentment to God for sure. Like I withheld worship for about 2.5 years. My wife is like, Cliff, you're pastoring this church that you just started and you're in the front row just standing there. Like, come on. I'm like, no, I got nothing. I'm not going to do that. And so I definitely had my ups and downs, but yeah, that was kind of more how I responded.
How do you kind of reconcile like where you say, you're leading a church, you're pastoring, and you know that God is good, but there's a disconnect in what you're experiencing? Because I mean, I'm sure there's students out there where they're like, oh, I understand that God is good. Like I understand that's who he is and that's his nature, but that hasn't been my experience.
Yeah, and so for me, a couple things. One, I think my definition of good was actually quite self-centered, and I had to readjust my definition of good
That's really good.
to something bigger than just my own comfort. My own, like, what if what I defined as God being good was actually me just being selfish,
Right.
or something like that? And so that had to change. And in that also, when I looked at other people in the Bible, like I tell people I've had a really crappy life. I've gone through some stuff, but the lie that you tell yourself when you're going through these is that you're the only one,
Right.
and I'm not. Like, just go through the Bible, go through history, and I'm like, okay, like I can see this, and in that even I was able to learn that maybe the definition of God being good to me is that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, which is the work of Satan. I won't fear that. Why? Because you're with me. And I realized that God would be with me in these places. And like the story of Job, like we sometimes have a real small picture of what is good. But what if, like, when you look at, step back and look at Job's entire life, you go, oh, I see it. I see God's goodness.
Yeah.
And so when there's certain points in his life where you're like, dude, it sucks to be you. which is totally true. God was still good. Job might not have fully experienced some of the goodness of God, and that's just how the Lord works. But yeah, so that's some of how I roll with the idea of reconciling God's goodness. And honestly, Ephesians 1 says, "I'm by nature an object of wrath. I'm born into sin." Like, I don't. What do I think I deserve? Because Ephesians 1 says I deserve God's wrath. So the fact that God saved me, the fact that I'm going to one day be fully whole and fully restored, I'm going to do that. One guy I was reading was saying this, that our culture right now has never really known struggle. And a great place to look at that is in our worship songs. Like, 50, 60, 70 years ago, when you listen to some of the worship songs, it's all forward progress. One day it's going to be this. I hope for this. And our worship songs now is, God, you're so good. Like, it's from a comfortable place. And I don't think that is a real robust understanding of what's good and what's realistic.
Right. What would you say to, the 13, 14-year-old tuning in, where it's hard to look at your life and be like, oh, someday it's going to be good. Because like right now, like, as like 10% of their life, 8% of their life has been spent in, crap, so to speak, like a large percentage of their life. And like, as life goes on and less of a percent is 1 year. But like you're looking at it, it's like, what would you say to a student that has to reconcile what goodness is and, maybe not being able to see the other side?
First of all, I really encourage, any of your students or anybody, like get into other people's life stories, hear their stories, whether it's in scripture. Like for me, I would read about King David and some of his lows. Like that guy was low and had a lot of hardship. And I would just look at them and I would learn from people. What did they do? How did they navigate that? And also because I would read their life story, it helped me step back and go, what I'm feeling right now is momentary. And there is going to be a tomorrow. I know that. I'm promised that. And by that, I'm actually promised an eternity. So that I did that, but also like to any of your students, take a moment. So when I was really young, we sang this song called "Count Your Blessings, Count Them One by One, Count Your Many Blessings and See What God Has Done." I actually think we forget God's good hand on our lives because we're moving so quick on to the next thing. Just stop and look. And what are you thankful for? Like Jordan, the fact that there's someone like you in their lives, that's a gift from God. The fact that there's other like-minded students, that's a gift from God. It's not, God's not punishing you in that. Like this is a gift. And I would be thankful for that. And I would actually lean into the good things that God has given me. And again, scripture is full of this, that both things can be true at the same time. I think in our day and age, we don't have super complex thinking. Like when Paul was in prison with his good friend Silas, two very opposite things were true at the same time. They're in a really bad spot. Like they're in prison, they're kind of screwed, but they're really good friends and they're having a rich time with Jesus and there's joy. Both things are true at the same time. And so I think for us that we can actually go, I'm really going through a crappy time. That's true. But there are still some good things in my life. Both can be true at the same time.
I mean, kind of what I'm hearing you saying is like, when people are kind of down and looking at it, they're like, well, how do I get through it? How do, there's this old cheesy adage of like, what's at the center of sin? The letter I. And it's just like, your eyes are only on your eyes are only on yourself. You're only looking at yourself. And kind of what I hear you saying is, just get your eyes off yourself and, begin to look around, begin to look at other people. And, as soon as you can start to do that, you actually can see a clear horizon. You can see, hope on the other side, that, there is a tomorrow, there is another day, there is a pathway forward, which kind of transitions us to, you were going through seasons of just utter crap, just not good. What did that ultimately like lead you to? Because it was disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. And then, you probably started to tailspin and spiral. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh man, I love that. You probably went into a tailspin and a spiral. No, I most definitely did. Yeah, there just came a point, right? Like there was just one too many things that happened, and because I had no metric, no way of really being able to process my loss, pain, my disappointments, my betrayals. Like even like at grade 8, all my friends I felt betrayed me because they rather see me get bullied than to be my friend. And it happened again when I was 17 years old. Like that's tough because it wasn't just one person, it was a lot of people all at once. So just yeah, there's one too many times. And yeah, I just spiraled.
Can you walk us through that kind of like that last straw that kind of broke the camel's back? Like where did it kind of land for you? Like what was the catalyst? Where did it go?
Yeah, like the problem is it's so fuzzy and hazy for me at that point. Like I don't know that I can pinpoint the day, the moment. I don't know that I can pinpoint even the whole way down. Like I was talking to a guy named Kerry Newhoff, and I was describing as I fell for about 3 months. I was just in this haze. I was confused. Like if you're falling, I don't know if you can imagine this, and you're spinning around, you actually don't know which way is up. You really lose a sense of what's happening. All I just know is that one day I woke up and everything was different. Like, yeah, my attitudes, what I valued, my outlook. My wife asked me this, and it was absolutely terrifying for her. She's the only one in my world that really knew how bad it was. That and my counselor. That was about it. I talked to a few other close friends. And I said to Aaron, because Aaron, it drove me nuts. I don't know if anyone can relate to this. With me, with my depression, they would say, Cliff, just get up. Like, just get up. Well, I can't. Yeah, you can. Get up off the couch. Like, just make yourself laugh. Like, smile. Ha ha ha. Like, and I just said to Aaron, my wife, I said, that talk is stupid. It just bugs me. I'm like a dead man on the side of the road, but I can see myself being dead. And it's about as logical as going to the casket in a funeral to the dead man and say, just breathe. So you could do it, just breathe. It was like I was dead and I knew it. I had no ability. Like I wasn't really doing much. It was dark. It was hopeless. And I was just there for a really, really long time.
What did So you kind of just like woke up in this season, like there wasn't a clear day, but there was just a process that brought you into it. And then one day you kind of just realized where you were.
Yeah.
Um, you know, which is hard because now we just finished talking about there is a tomorrow, there is another day, there is like, what did that season look like for you? Like,
Oh
what
man.
was,
So yeah, so just so we're clear, when I say there's another day, this is me post.
yeah,
Um, when I was there in my darkest, uh, again, my theology was intact, so I was always faithful to God. But oh man, yeah, I was in such a bad place. And so I would read, like when I remember I said read biographies and stuff like that. Like I read books like Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. It's a real old book, emotional healthy spirituality, and I think by God's grace, the first thing that I just was able to just hang on, if you can imagine me traversing up a side of a cliff, was the phrase, "I'm not okay, I will be okay."
Right.
Just that both are true in the moment. I'm not okay. And that just really allowed me to have time to process what I'm feeling. I really got to, I really went in, I did a deep dive into myself, which I'd never done before, to go, what are my emotions? What am I feeling? And I really looked around to see how dark it was and what I was feeling. But I also knew that at the same time, I will be okay. And in that moment, I didn't know when. I didn't know if it'd be in this life or in my next life when I saw Jesus. But I knew it was true that one day I was going to be okay. And that was the first thing that helped me go, there's going to be a tomorrow. And honestly, probably about a year and a half into my depression, a year and a half at, seeing counselors and working on this, I came to a point where I went, this just might be my lot in life. And then I knew I was actually looking back at that I was really getting healthy because I began to seek contentment. Not joy was eluding me, but contentment, just like, okay, like this is okay in this. And I was like, okay, Lord, this just might be the rest of my life. And I began to seek contentment, but that was actually the final stages of me coming out of my depression.
Now, talk to us a little bit about feeling you're depressed versus like, I'm just having an off day or it's raining and, I'm just moody.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're two different things. And I use the example of someone with a really bad headache. What do we say? I have a migraine. And well, no, you just might have a really bad headache. What's true is you've got your head's pounding and it's really bad, but you don't have to self-diagnose yourself to something worse than it really is. And we have emotions. God made us with emotions, and sometimes we're just blue. We're just feeling kind of down, and that's okay. Usually those things, those downward emotional things are usually maybe connected to something. Maybe something happened in your life, like, maybe someone close to you got sick or something bad happened. Or if you're like my wife, she always got depressed after Christmas. Like she just feel really low, like, oh man, there's no dinners, there's no parties.
Yeah,
But
360 days until the next Christmas.
exactly. You bounce back pretty quick. And it's not hopeless. It's not dark. You're not powerless. You just feel blue. And that's a true feeling. And that stuff is terrible and it sucks, but it's different than depression. For me, I can only speak from my own experience. Like I couldn't get out. Like I was there for years. And I was powerless. Like, Aaron would say, I haven't heard you laugh for like a year and a half. When I'd preach angry. I engaged a lot in my stress behaviors, and I didn't really have a lot of relief. So that's the difference between someone feeling kind of blue or sad versus depression.
Now, in your depression, did you have like moments of like, oh, this was a good day, like,
No,
Christmas, birthdays, like
no,
there was just nothing, just
no, dude,
dark hole for
no, I was emotionally dead. So
right.
like, and Aaron would look at me going, this is a good thing. And I'm like, I don't care.
How did that affect like your family, your
Yeah, it's brutal.
kids?
It's brutal.
And so like, how would they remember it?
They remember it for what it was. Like, I was honest with them, with what I was going through. I felt that was the best way I could be a dad instead of hiding. Like once I knew what was happening, like I remember at first I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why I was like this. I didn't know why I wasn't bouncing back. But once we figured it out, we did talk to the kids. I created this phrase. Uh, it's not that I'm unwilling, I'm unable. It's not like to my daughter, it's not that I don't want to hug you or I have a go on some great daddy daughter dates. It's I'm unable. Like I can't right now.
Right.
My kids got that. They understood that.
I mean that's awesome because I mean you can only imagine like the things that you're feeling in the season or I guess not feeling in the season, everything that was happening. On the other side of it, looking back with all the disappointments that kind of led up to it. I mean, you kind of talked about it, suicide of your uncle, your dad's cancer, your death of your favorite aunt, you giving part of your liver to your
Oh yeah, I
mother-in-law.
forgot to add that one on the list. Yeah, that was a big one.
Like all of these things, like, you did some like real stuff, like some pretty drastic, like abuse in ministry that would like take most people out to never step foot in the church again. Like that level of like, and this is all like year after year where it's like, I can only imagine January 1 rolls around. You're like, I wonder what it's going to be this year.
That's
It's just
exactly
like, blow after blow. Hindsight, what would you change in those seasons, that you'd say like you didn't do well? You're like, I wish I would have done this, because obviously you can't change it now, but looking back, I mean, you've been able to operate your life in a way that you haven't fallen into it again. You haven't gotten back to that place because you put barriers, healthy boundaries, and habits in your life. What were some of the things that you would change going back?
Excuse me. First of all, I would actually be way more authentic, first with myself. When bad things would happen, I'm just like, that's no big deal. It's nothing. I got it. I can do this. Like when my dad died from his cancer, I literally put my entire family, my mom, my 3 sisters, my wife, my kids on my back, and I carried them. I did everything. Like to this day, like I still work real close with my mom, on just navigating life with her. I'm the man in her life, if you will. Just more because the Bible talks about being a widow. You care for widows, different widows and orphans. And so I would always have that. I would deflect everything. I would never stop to feel, to process, and to consider. So looking back, one, I'd be way more honest with myself, with some of my my defeats, my failures. Two, I would be way more authentic with my relationships, with my friends, with my mentors, different things. Like the first time I really had an honest conversation with my mentor, and I had different mentors throughout my life. It was when everything fell apart in my first church. And he and I drove across continental USA for 4 days. So it's actually a gift. I got to be locked in a car with my mentor for 4 days. Dude, but we talked for hours. And that I remember there going, I feel awkward telling him what was true. Like as Christians, we always know to say the right answer, but I wish I was able to say the true answer. And so those would definitely be some of the things. And thirdly, I would definitely have better spiritual rhythms in my life. I didn't have good spiritual rhythms. I'm not really good at that just to begin with. I always feel really dumb with all the pastors. I pray 4 hours, like as a pastor, and I'm in these, hearing these guys pray for 5 hours, 4 hours a day. I studied the Bible, this. I'm like, what do you do? I looked at the cover. Does that count as I read my Bible? I read Holy Bible, like so. But I would definitely have better rhythms with my spiritual rhythms. Those 3 things, 4 things would be. I wish I could do over.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about when you say like, you be honest with yourself? Because like, when you said that, there's 2 things that come to mind. I think like, ourselves are the easiest to lie to and the hardest to lie to, because we're so good at convincing ourselves like, oh, this is a good thing. Like we talk ourselves into things, like we will ourselves into things. Like, I think like as like any guy that would be like, oh, I'm not going to go look at something inappropriate. I'm just going to go on the internet. Like we just lie to ourselves as we go into it. But then at the end of the day, like when you put your head on the pillow at night, like what's true and honest. How would you be more honest with yourself? Like what does that actually look like?
Well, here's what's crazy. I don't think like when you said you put your head on the pillow and what's honest. I don't know if that's always the case. Just a couple of days ago, I was preaching at Westside, and my point was authenticity is tough. And I gave the example of David in 2 Samuel, I think it's 12. sleeping with Bathsheba, had the sinful sexual encounter with Bathsheba. And then for 9 months, he was lying to himself, right? I'm a good husband. I'm a good king over Israel. I have a great relationship with God. And then when God spoke through the prophet Nathan, David didn't even recognize God's voice.
Right.
So that kind of terrifies me, because I'm like, we're so good at lying to ourselves. I'm afraid that I can't snap out of it, to be honest with you. And so that kind of terrifies me. So sorry, I totally went off on the tangent. So what was the original question again?
How do you be more honest with yourself?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I would actually, so as I'm going through my memories right now, like I remember one time, so I was a bit of the OG for campus ministry in Richmond. Like I eventually was getting like 500-600 students at my events. But when I started, I had a lot of failures. I remember once I really went on a limb. I brought in some people from Seattle, did a lot of big stuff, and it bombed. I remember sitting there going, this isn't a problem. This isn't a problem. This isn't bad. And you know what? The failure wasn't bad, but I told myself it was. And so I didn't allow myself to think these things. I somehow thought I did something bad and I didn't want to go there. Instead, like I would have loved true honesty to myself would have been to go, that was a really great effort. I was trying to do the right thing. There's some things for me to learn in that. Man, that hurt. That sucks, but I can move on. But I never let myself do any of that. And that, I think, is something that would have been helpful for me.
Do you think something like verbal processing, like, you said being authentic with your leader, being honest with him, telling him what is actually true, like that would be like almost a safeguard to put into place? I mean, I know that's something that I've done. There's been many times you and I have sat out on your porch or in your basement and we're just processing, we're just spitballing. I'm like, hey, is what I feel actually true in this moment?
Yeah, and yes. And that's the thing I never allowed myself. I never gave myself that opportunity. And that would be a really great example of some of the things that weren't in place, which is what got me to where I was. So yeah, that's huge. Like the idea of verbal processing, hey, this is what I'm feeling. What do you think? To have someone who's not as connected to be able to say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking. And you kind of want a godly perspective in that to give you godly counsel. Man, that's a total game changer.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, SOMA, like you've heard me say many, many times, like when I first walked into this church, it was kind of like the bait and switch. Like, it wasn't what I exactly expected. What you don't know is I was in his basement talking through and, I looked at him and I said, Cliff, what do I do? And he was like, well, you got to stick it out. I'm like, you sure? Because Mark said I could have my job back. And it was just like, he's like, nope, we felt God, you're staying. And it was one of those, like, it didn't feel real good in that moment. So accountability, godly leadership, that's huge. Now, back to your season of depression, it didn't span months, but years. How'd you get out of it? You kind of started to allude to it, but like what was that incline out?
It was really slow. It was really slow. It was really subtle. I really got to know myself, my weaknesses. I really got to see what parts of me were broken. But because of that, one of the things that I did is I was able then to see the things, my slow progression, and I would celebrate my simple wins. Like, at the risk of almost sounding like a bad comedian joke, like motivation is a huge problem for me. And so like maybe a win for me would be I got off the couch and I talked to my kids for 5 minutes in an evening. And I would go away and I'm like, hey, I wasn't able to do that 2 weeks ago, but I did it today. And it was a bit of a win. I can't go to Erin, hey, baby, I talked to the kids for 5 minutes. Aren't I awesome? Because she's like, no. So, but I just more and more saw there to be improvements. Some of the things that I couldn't do before, I was able to do. I'd be thankful. I didn't know what it meant. Like, oh man, I'm almost out. It's just, I remember I was talking to my counselor and uh, like I said, I was really bad. And he goes, yeah, you were. Like, just with my depression. He goes, how are you now? I said, well, I feel really good, but I don't know. Ask me in 6 months. And I can tell you in 6 months what I was like, when we were talking, because I have no idea. The real
Right.
cool thing is, because this just informs a lot of my life. I got a note from someone yesterday from my preach on Sunday, and they said, I loved your sermon. You just had a real joyful way about you. Like, guys, you know what? Like, I was the guy that had massive anger issues. I was the guy that preached angry. It was hopeless. And now that this is what is coming out of me, like, that's just God. Like, so, but it was really slow. Just to answer your question, like, really, really slow.
Yeah, it was a slow process. But I mean, even recognizing the idea that you could, you said like celebrate the small things, just the idea of that you're going to celebrate.
Yeah.
Like that idea of itself, where it's like you couldn't celebrate anything, birthday, Christmas, like nothing. But then the idea of like, oh, I talked to the kids for 5 minutes, I'm going to celebrate something. Just the premise of I'm going to celebrate.
Yeah, you're totally right. That looking back, I hadn't actually even thought of that one. That in of itself was an indicator of me getting better. And then to identify them and to celebrate, like, it was a small win, it's a small celebration, but it was still just that acknowledgement.
No, that's so awesome. A question that we kind of touched on, but this is from Leah and Isaac. Do you know what caused your depression?
Well, and what I say is this, too many times in my life, I had loss, pain, disappointment, betrayal. And that happens to everybody. Like, I get that I'm not unique, but I had no way of dealing with it. So it literally just mounted one on top of the other. Instead of, when that happens, process it, and then it's off my plate, and then I can keep going. I think that's what it was, because they were all just really, really bad things. It was just one too many.
Right. So it was just thing after thing where it's like, how do you how do you reconcile, or what would you say to somebody where they would say, "Oh, I've dealt with that," but there's probably still baggage there. Maybe they might not even know it, but where they said, "No, I've dealt with that."
Yeah. I was actually talking to a pastor just a couple of weeks ago that was really working through some deep pain. And they were saying that I've dealt with that. And I'm like, bro, you haven't. When you said this, and this, you haven't. And so what I would say is test it. Talk to the people that know you, talk to the people that love you, that you trust, and ask them. Like, that's why I asked my counselor. I was really bad. Like, I was asking, yeah, you were. I think I'm doing good. What do you think? And I think that's probably the best way to go. I'm not a fan of self-diagnosing, because we've already determined we can lie to ourselves. We can say what's true, or sorry, the right answer. I've dealt with it, but it might not be the true answer. With this, I've dealt with it 5%, but 95% of it I haven't. Like, forgiveness is a really good example. We always are told, forgive the person. Yeah, no, screw that. Like, I have to actually process. I have to see what's all been done. For me to say to somebody, I forgive you, that's almost the last thing I do. It's not the first thing. I don't say it as a statement of intent. I say it as a verified fact, because sometimes forgiveness, because of some of the things that I've gone through, I can't say I forgive you. No, I have to go through all of my different emotions. And that was with my counselor. There was one person I really had a hard time forgiving. And I went into his office and I said, I saw him. And my counselor looked at me. He's like, what did you do? I went, nothing. And that was when I knew, oh, like, just guys, you got to know, again, I had anger issues, and in my deepest, darkest days, I would be so unstable emotionally that someone would slam on their brakes in front of me. And I'm like, all right, man, it's on. And I put my Jeep in park, and I'm ready to just go for a good old fashioned throwdown. And as they drive away, I was disappointed. I would dream about doing, like, all kinds of terrible, violent things to certain people. And so I saw this guy, and that's why my counselor was a little nervous, as was I when I saw him, because I'm like, am I going to rip his head off? And I didn't. And it was only in that moment that I knew I was okay.
Man, that's so incredible to like think about, where it's like all of this time, like I love that, and I appreciate that you're sharing so vulnerably about this, because I think as pastors we kind of have like, or people project onto us that like we got our stuff together, but here you are at a red light wanting to like throw hands with somebody because they stepped on the brakes too quickly.
Yeah, well, yeah, they did nothing to me. It just showed just how bad of a place I was, right? And the fact that my initial reaction was disappointment that it didn't happen just shows how bad I was. Like I look back at that guy, like myself in that, I just feel bad. Like I just grieve for just how terrible it was for me. And at the same time, I'm just so thankful. Both are going to be true. It's just so thankful on God, how God was so gracious to me when I literally didn't have too many options.
Right. Now, not to be redundant, but back onto like the idea of like disappointment in this season, because I mean there's going to be a lot of it, missing friend groups, missing people, missing friends' weddings. Like I know I have a wedding coming up next month in South Dakota that's probably not going to happen. I'm mourning not going on that trip. Graduation, like the laundry list is out there of what is able to be disappointment about. What would you say, like, how do you deal with disappointment in this unique season of COVID?
Grieve it. Like you're right. Like, for students that aren't able to have grad, or certain family holidays or whatever, guys, that really, really sucks. The job that you were hoping to get so you could pay for university or buy whatever, build your resume, whatever, grieve it. It's okay. I just don't think we let ourselves do that. Be sad, mourn, bring that to the Lord, and just bring it. God, this really, really sucks. And I actually think that in and of itself is the beginning of us being able to move forward in getting out of it. Don't pretend it didn't happen. Don't pretend it didn't hurt. Don't pretend it doesn't matter. It does.
Can you focus on that a little bit more? Like, I think of my life in like my season of leaving California. I don't think it's any secret for anybody that I didn't want to go. Who would want to? Everybody still wants to go back. Like, even right now, like, why wouldn't you? Like, what a place to be quarantined by the beach. Oh no. And, grieving that season, I would say like I did that well. Like, I shed real tears and cried a lot.
So, but just hang on, and like, because you're being funny, which is because you are funny, and that's awesome. But what you didn't grieve the beach, you
No.
grieved you grieved the people,
Yeah.
you grieved the church, and those are real things. Like that was very real. You grieved the fact that you were going this way, or you thought, and all of a sudden, bam, there was this huge pivot that was forced on you. Those are the things that you grieved. Like it's easy for us to navigate being on a beach, that's whatever. But this stuff, yeah, that was deep stuff for you. And yeah, you did a really good job in processing that, in my opinion.
Now, give us an insight. Like, when you say grieve it, how do we grieve well?
Well, I guess for everyone's different, but first of all, to allow yourself to recognize the disappointment. Like I say, if it was the grad, the holidays, the jobs, the parties, whatever, my son is trying to get a girlfriend and he's like missing all these opportunities. Like there's so many things that's happening because of COVID. I would just allow yourself to go, man. I would then stop and go, what am I feeling? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it confusion? Is it fear? Just begin to, like, that's us processing it. And then in that, like, how does a believer respond with sadness or disappointment or fear or anger? And then once you're able to do, I think, that deeper dive, what does the Bible actually have to say about that? how does the Bible instruct me on how to respond? How do I move forward in light of that? For me, one of my big takeaways is this: that I can have joy, I can have contentment, I can have peace in my heart, and that is not biblically. That is not at all connected to my circumstances. Like I've seen people in the Bible go through real crappy situations, and there's still some joy and there's still some peace. Why? Because the things that I'm mourning actually aren't going to make me happy.
Right.
I can still mourn them, and that's disappointment. But at the core for me, as I go through all that is, I can actually, the things that I really value, I can have, that actually isn't gone, and I can have joy, I can have peace, I can have happiness, even in bad situations. Why? Because that's when Jesus comes in those moments. And it's what the Bible talks about, when that Christ is your ultimate source of those things. So for me, that's, but I have to go down, I have to drill down. What am I feeling? What does the Bible say about that? How does that inform me? How can I respond? And how can I move forward? And that's, a really quick snapshot on maybe how someone can grieve well.
No, that's so good. Like, I don't think that we give permission enough for grieving. Like, we don't
Totally.
allow that, or, that idea of like, oh, I'm feeling this way. That's not right. I just need to be joyful. Like, I need to be that good Christian, like all of that. But it's the idea of like, no, it's okay that I'm missing this because that was a good thing. And in that, it's kind of like the idea of like, it's the death of something, and it might not be physically, but it's like, it's the death of that graduation, it's the death of that season, it's the death of that. And it'd be weird in that if you weren't to like mourn somebody that passed away. It's weird if you're really looking forward to something and not mourning that as well.
Totally. And I think if you do this really well, eventually you do look at God and you're like, yo, what the what? Like I think Job did that. Habakkuk did that. Hosea did that. Like a lot of people in the Bible did this. And it's like, oh, okay, I actually can be a good Christian and have these questions about God. And now what? And reading some of those stories, if it's Habakkuk, Job, whatever, you get to go, oh, okay. I see God's perspective in the middle of all of this stuff. Like for me, a great example is the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Here's a guy who had a series of bad things happen. His brother staged his murder. He was put in slavery in a foreign country. He got a good gig at a government official's house. Potiphar did the right thing, got thrown in jail. Like thing after thing that was bad. And in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, what does Joseph say? That what Satan meant for harm, God used it for good. And we say that verse all the time, but that was the victim who said that.
Right.
Right. The guy who lost, like, we're upset because we're going to lose 4 or 5 months, maybe, who knows? This guy lost like 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
And setback after setback. When I look there, for example, at his setbacks, I went, oh, my perspective, those weren't setbacks. That actually was God positioning him to do what, like when he worked in Potiphar's house, he learned or when he got in the slavery in Egypt, he learned the language and he learned the customs and culture, right? When he was in Potiphar's house, he learned government. He learned the people, the players. When he got thrown into prison, he learned, in Potiphar's house, he learned management 101. In the prison, he learned management 2.0. He was like the CEO and the COO of it, all the while being spiritually solid and legit. So, and when it came time for him to meet Pharaoh, he was solid in his faith, but he knew how to manage, he knew how to lead, he knew the customs, he knew everything. And like, oh, God was positioning himself for this moment. And so the victim said it was good. Why? Because many were saved. Joseph never made it about himself. He made it about something bigger. And he went, I see what God was doing. It was good that I went through this.
Yeah.
He saw the benefit.
It's so good. Just like that idea again, it's like getting the eyes off yourself and looking forward. Like, there is a tomorrow. What is good? It may not be this situation, but it's the greater situation that we don't actually realize. One final question, then I'll have you pray for us. How do you deal with it today? Like, how do you deal with combating depression, not coming back? Because I'm sure there's moments where it's like you
Yeah.
see it kind of like it's seeping in. You're like, oh no, not today. Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, remember when you asked me the question, what are the things I wish I did?
Yeah.
It's what I do now. So I have my spiritual rhythms of prayer, of meditation. I slow down. I have times where I look deep, like how am I? I do my self check in. What am I feeling? Am I engaging in my stress behaviors or am I healthy? I have authentic, true conversations with about 4 older men that are further down the road of life than me. And like like a week ago, I was with one of my buddies who knows everything, and we're just hanging out by the fire, social distancing, of course. And he was just really drilling down deep. How are you, Cliff? How are these things? And I really embraced that. I was so thankful that my friend would ask me some real pointed questions. I gave myself to that. So those are some of the things that I do now. I'm honest with Aaron, because when I'm not doing well, I will stop and I will do what I need to do so I don't fall right off the rails.
Oh, that's so awesome. Now, would you pray for us before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to. God, I just thank you how David writes in the Psalms that you're the lifter of our head, that we don't have to pretend, we don't have to come across as being bubbly or up, but that ultimately you lift our head, you lift our countenance, you're the one that lifts us up. And so, Lord, I just pray that for some of the students that might be going through a real tough time during this season of COVID. Would you, by your Holy Spirit, just do something miraculous? Would you lift their head? Would you help them to look up? When they look up, they will see you. They will see your good hand. They will see that you're trustworthy and that you're true. So, Lord, I just pray for every student that's listening, that's a part of this, that you would give that there would be an open, honest vulnerability that we, your children, would have with you, to even bring these things to you, and then that you would so graciously care for us and be gracious to us, God, as our limitations of our humanity kick in and we freak out and we lash out and we act poorly. Be gracious to us in those moments. God, you made us. You know the things that we struggle with, and just allow us to just move forward, Lord, so that we can actually receive from you and ultimately receive the life that you have for us. And so, yeah, I pray this in your good name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Pastor Cliff, thanks so much for being with us. Soma, the Zoom IDs are in the chat where you can click it. Please don't join a group that you do not belong to, because that'd be weird and the leader will kick you out. Have some real conversation about this. Talk with your life group leader. I mean, talk about things that you're grieving in this season. Connect with them. They would love to follow up with you more throughout the week and continue talking to you. But go ahead and jump into those Zoom chats. Soma, we love you, and we will see you back here next week. Peace.
See you guys.